thank you and welcome to Podstalgia. Is it the first Indonesian podcast that have reached you yet, or before?
Yeah, this is the first Indonesian podcast I have ever done in my life.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, hello. Maybe we can start by what is the major reason or what is the big push why you want to make Ilo Ilo story as your debut feature film? Because I see that before you already make a short film, right? But why you make this as a your feature film, Ilo Ilo?
Um, I think when people see the film, they can tell that it is quite personal, and the inspiration of the film really came from my own childhood because I grew up in Singapore. We had a domestic helper from Philippines who worked in our home for 8 years.
Mm.
I wasn't an only child. In real life, I have two younger brothers, and we do have a Filipino helper, and her name was Teresa, and we called her Auntie Terry.
Oh,
So it's quite interesting because I think I made a lot of years of short films. I went to film school in Singapore and I went to film school in the UK. And after making, close to 8 short films, I knew it was time to do my first feature film. When I was figuring out what I wanted to make as my first film, it's quite odd. It's not like I chose to make this film. I felt like this film was urging me to tell the story.
yeah.
Like I was dreaming about it. I was thinking about my childhood. I was thinking about, the sort of dynamics at home. I was thinking of what happened during the financial crisis. My father lost his job during the financial crisis, and he never got a good job again. So in a way, it's very personal, and that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell a film that was honest, that was personal, um, uh, something that I feel very deeply about.
Yeah, and I think your reason, the honesty that you want to bring to the film, it's also felt by all of the audience here. Like for me also, because Singapore is like Indonesia neighbor, right?
Yeah.
Like for me, for an Indonesian, when I think about Singapore, I see like tall buildings and the glass in the ceilings and all of the developed part of it. But when I watch Ilo Ilo, I see like more like human stories in it, and a lot of Indonesian, especially the middle class family here, also hiring a domestic worker, and most of them are also coming from other regions outside Jakarta, outside big cities. And when I see your movie, when I and also my friends watch your film, it's like wow, it's not only happened here in Indonesia, it's also happened there in Singapore, especially with the setting of the Asian financial crisis. It's a big moment for all of us in Asian country. And you said that Auntie Teresa. So the name from the film and your real life mate is same.
Yeah, it's exactly the same name, and I think what was very interesting about the experience of making this film is that actually after we grew up, she returned home to the Philippines when I was about 12, 13 years old, and
Mhm.
we have never seen her since. For at least what um, 18 years, 18 to 20 years. And it's very interesting that, after the film, went to the Cannes Film Festival, it won a huge prize. The media in the Philippines actually contacted me, and they were very curious to know, who is this person. And it was through this film that we actually found back, our Filipino helper, our Filipino sort of like maid, Auntie Terry. And for the first time, I went to the hometown, and her hometown obviously is Ilo Ilo, and
Yeah.
it's the first time I've been there. It's quite a moving experience. So there is a story sort of on screen, and then there's another story sort of like off screen, and it's quite. I think I was quite moved by the entire experience of not just making the film, but also distributing the film and showing the film, everywhere in the world. Like what you have shared, I I was quite surprised. When the film first premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, I always thought there's a very local film. It's a very Singapore film that, unless you're Singaporean, unless you grew up in Singapore, you might not really connect with those emotions. But I was very surprised that there is a version of that story everywhere in the world. Whether is it in France, where you've got people that had an au pair, sort of like that were taking care of them for like years and years, or even in South America. I remember in India, what they shared with me was the same. The fact that um, they do not have sort of like a maid at home that comes from like another country, but they have a maid coming from another province, another city, another town, or of a different caste. And a lot of middle class sort of like um, Indian children were brought up like that. So it's quite interesting that a film that was very I thought was very local and culturally specific, ended up becoming one that was very, very universal.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you said that you are growing up with Auntie Terry for more or less like 8 years, right?
Yeah.
So there is like a big presence of her in your childhood. So maybe you can tell us some story of like happy or sad story that you had with Auntie Terry. Is it like you bring some of the stories into the film, or it's because I read some interviews like people like to mention Ilo Ilo as your autobiographical, but it's what do you think about that?
I mean, first and foremost, I think it's definitely inspired by childhood and my memories of Singapore, my memories of growing up, in Singapore during the 90s. But I wouldn't say it's completely autobiographical, because I did have to, um, if one were to just make a film about one's own life, usually real life is very mundane and it's very flat, and it's very boring. So I did need to like make certain characters, subvert certain characters, and of course, drive the dramatic stakes for a lot of the characters. But um, a lot of the details, really came from my childhood. For example, there was a time where my father brought back young little chicks, and we had
Uh,
chickens in a balcony. I had that in my childhood. During like birthday parties, we would always order
okay,
McDonald's or KFC, because
yeah.
I love KFC. Um, and in real life, my helper did slaughter the kitchen that we raised, and she made chicken rice out of it. So there are a lot of that stuff, and I shared as well that my father actually lost his job during the financial crisis. So a lot of the details came from life, but I had to get a bit creative on the dramatic stakes. That being said, um, if you look at the film, it's an only child. There's only Tiala, or there's only one boy. But in my real life, I've got two younger brothers. But one thing that stayed um, in my head was that moment when we had to send her off at the airport um, when she had to go back to the Philippines. I remember I cried so much. I cried like I've never, like cried so much in my life before. And, it was not just me and my two brothers. We were crying and crying and crying. But in the film, I didn't want to write that scene that way. I didn't want to stage it that way, because if I were to stage it that way, it would just be a very melodramatic,
Yeah.
soap opera, that like a kitchen sink drama that we see on television all the time. Which is why, for me, it's very important that I subvert that scene, and I did that on a few levels. You realize that usually when you have a separation scene, you have a lot of hugging, you have a lot of
Yeah.
crying, and I made sure that there's no hugging, there's no crying, and it's
Yeah.
quite brutal. You see, instead of all the hugging and crying, like he gets a tight slap. Because childhood for me, it's always brutal. And I wrote a separation scene where technically they don't get to separate, because usually when you have an airport scene, you have got the two main people in the airport, right?
Yeah.
But I wrote the scene such that he gets stuck in the car and he doesn't even go into the airport. And then, I think the third level of subversion I did was that the separation scene, which everyone would expect is between the maid and the boy, but the two people that I brought inside to the airport was actually the mother
Yeah.
and the maid, who probably has the most friction and tension going on. And I just thought, okay, if we have seen so many separation scenes before, if we know that so well from TV, from films, how people cry and hug and say goodbye, like, what's a new way to do it? And that was what I did. I try and subvert all the stereotypes of what a
The
separation scene
separation.
is. Yeah.
And I also remember in the closing scene when finally like Jaila brother is born. He's listening to like cassette, right, and a cassette player like a Walkman, and the song is is it a Filipino song?
It is a Filipino song, and I discovered that song. I knew when I wrote the script,
Yeah,
and I knew that it's going to end with a Filipino song because in the film, I've shown that like Auntie Terry always listens to the
yeah,
Walkman, and like there's a scene where she's holding on to his her earphone. So my idea is that she probably left this Walkman for him,
yeah,
and I knew on the script, I wrote it down that there would be a Filipino song that played, and so in a way I was just listening to a lot of songs, and this song just uh, moved me a lot. When I first listened to it, I didn't, and I knew it needs to be a song from that period. It needs
yeah,
to be a song from like the 80s, the 90s. It can't be a song from present day. So I was listening to a lot of music from that time, and I was also, asking Filipino filmmakers for some advice, and I was listening to a lot of music. So this song really moved me, and I just felt it works. And then when I went to look at the lyrics, I
yeah,
cut and paste the Tagalog lyrics and Google translate it. And I realized that, it talks about life, and it talks about rebirth. And I thought, oh, it's very suitable.
yeah.
And I put it in together with the editor, and it just worked. And I asked for, it's an independent film. We don't have a lot of money. So, through a Filipino filmmaker friend, I wrote to the original sort of like singer, and we got the rights for the song, um, and I'm really glad I chose the song.
Yeah, because after I watching Ilo Ilo, I was like, okay, this song, I don't know, like I don't understand Tagalog, right? I don't understand like the lyrics, but the melody and the tunes and the mellow side of it drive me like, okay, this song is really like complete the films. And after I find to Google Translate, I was like, oh, okay, the lyrics like really, really suits all the story and everything.
Yeah.
And okay, when you writing Ilo Ilo, were you was living in Singapore, or you already moved to UK actually?
I was when I started writing Ilo Ilo, I started just after I finished my masters in directing at the National Film and Television School in the UK. So I was still living in London at the time when I started writing, but I moved back to Singapore shortly because I needed to start looking for uh, the right team to work together with. I haven't been back in Singapore for a few years. I needed to find the crew and find the people that could help me make this film. So I started writing it in London, but I did a lot of the writing back home in Singapore as well.
And I see that the setting is in 90s, so there's like of questions too from our followers, from Podstalgia friends. How do you find all the furniture, like the wardrobe and all the like the apartment? How do you find it? Because it's really hard if because I see in the film the sense of the 90s, it's really really strong. Like
Yeah.
how did you manage it? How you make
I
it?
think what was interesting is a lot of the production design, because it's such a personal film, you see, and I've got a very strong memory of the 90s, because of, I think a lot of us would have very strong memories of how our childhood feels,
Yeah.
the color, the textures, the feeling. And so a lot of the production design comes from memory, but it also comes from a lot of photographs. Like for example, I found a photograph of my mom, and she had this crazy, curls, the perm hair I call like the Whitney Houston hairstyle, like which the mother had. So when I took the actress to the salon, I said I'm gonna do like this really ugly sort of like Whitney Houston hairstyle, and she was a bit shocked. And even the color of the lipstick. Remember, it was a time where
Yeah.
every lipstick was like really red, and people looked like they put on too much makeup. And then like even I could remember very well like the kind of fabrics that goes on the sofas, the curtains, and because a lot of Singapore is very modern, and it's very hard to find old materials and fabric. I remember we even had to go to Malaysia
Oh
to
yeah.
find some of all these sort of like old curtains and cloths and fabrics so everything that you see was created from scratch. So the flat that you saw is an empty flat, but that flat, we spent a long time looking for a flat because that the shape of the flat and the
Mhm.
time it was built was exactly how my home looked like in the 90s. But it
Oh.
was completely empty, so we had to find the furniture, we had to find all the props to dress it from scratch. Yeah, in fact, in the kitchen, if you look at the kitchen, there's a scene where she opens
Yeah.
the cabinet door, and to offers her a cup, and she says like um, red or blue, and then she
Yeah.
says plastic, like won't break. And in the kitchen, all the kitchen cabinets that you see are not real because they were built because there was nothing in the kitchen. So our sort of art director built the kitchen cabinets, and because of the script, we designed it so that only one cabinet could be open. So everything else is fake. Like you can't open
You
it,
can
and
open it.
it's empty inside. But for me, it's very important. I think a lot of my films, whether my short films or even my feature films, it's always about authenticity, it's always about honesty, and it's always about finding truth, and that's what I try and do. And it's quite hard to do. And I remember when it's my first feature. It's an independent film. We didn't have so much money, and I remember the day before we started shooting, the first day, and we still had to dress the house, and a lot of stuff was missing. I literally like contacted all my friends from school, um, and I drove to all their homes to borrow sort of stuff from their storeroom. So all their parents, their old stuff, like I would be like taking lots and lots of old photographs and books and bags and all sorts of stuff.
Okay, because like in a film, it feels really real, or like the space and the bedroom and the kitchen and the dinner, like the dining table and all. So well, it's you guys build it from scratch, so no wonder. And so how long have you been living in UK for now? Like,
Quite long. I mean, if you were to count the time from I started school here,
yeah.
I first came to UK in 2007. So
Oh,
it's literally, this year would be 13
13
years.
years, right?
But, on and off, I've been traveling back to Singapore a lot
Yeah.
because, there were 2 years where I was in Singapore a lot to make Ilo Ilo. I was hopping back and forth, but I was spending a lot of time in Singapore. Even to this day, even though I live in London, because my production company, Giraffe Pictures, is still based in Singapore. So I still sort of like go back to Asia a lot, because I still make a lot of work out of Asia.
Yeah. And I want to ask that how did you find Coach Jaler as like the Jale, because he was so young, right, at the time of the shooting, and like his acting is so like pure and raw, and it's like Jale, not like Coach Jale acting or something.
Yeah.
Like, can you tell us the story, how and why you pick him for the
So
cast?
we, like together with my casting team, we spent a very long process sort of looking for this actor because he was such an important actor in this film. And like a huge part of the film basically is on the shoulders of this young actor. And that age, like he's playing a 10-year-old boy. It's very hard to find like an actor that could do that. So we decided to cast very wide. We went to a lot of schools. We went to 21 primary schools, and we saw 8,000 children. Out of this 8,000, I think the team auditioned about like 1,000 of them. And from the 1,000, we shortlisted about 300, and the 300 would go into workshops that we would do over months and months. We did workshops for I think 10 months, and every Saturday and Sunday we would divide like that 300 students, kids, into groups of 30, and we would run like 3 workshops on Saturday, 3 workshops on Sunday. And it was almost like a reality talent show, where you start with like hundreds, and eventually I remember like at the end of about 9 to 10 months we were down to 10 children. And he like he was one of the first children, first child that I really took notice of, because I remember that I personally was there when I saw him, because he was from my primary school. So I
Okay.
went back to my own primary school, and we saw lots of children. And I remember like he was doing a performance for Teachers' Day on stage, and there was he was doing like martial arts, like kung fu, and there was a certain confidence. There was a certain sort of grace, and you could see like he really sparked. You could feel it. He was really shining, but he has never acted before. He has never been in a play, never been on TV, never been on stage, never been in a film. And he came in and we did all these workshops and all that. Eventually, you could see very easily that it would be him, because he was very he wasn't very self-conscious at all. A lot of kids are very self-conscious. When you tell them to do something, they'll be worried about whether they did it right. He didn't really care. He was, if you ask him to do something, he would just do it. And but he was very, very naughty. He was a very naughty boy. Like I remember on set, he drove all of us nuts. He drove like the actress playing the Filipino helper, like Anjali Bayani, like really nuts. Like but he is immensely talented, and he was a real discovery. And interestingly, I've worked with him again on a new
In
film.
Western, right?
Yes, I've worked with both 2 actors from my first film, Yan, who plays the mother, and Ko Jiala, who plays the son in Ilo Ilo, on my new film, Wet Season. And so it's quite interesting. I feel like with filmmaking, a lot of times you go on a journey and you think you know what to expect and you know what you're searching for, but sometimes like there is some kind of divine authority, or I'm not a religious person, so I don't really believe like in that one God or whatever it is, but I believe that there is something out there that's probably guiding us in very weird ways. And um, somehow I discovered this boy, and 6 years later I rediscovered him again, and I have no idea that he's still so good. And he's really special, and he's very talented, and we've made another film together. And very soon, in 2 years time, I'm gonna make a third film
Oh,
with
wow.
both actors again, with Yan and Kojala, and it will officially be part 3, or the final part of the trilogy. And it's
Oh,
officially the growing up
the
trilogy,
growing up.
because in the first film we see him in primary school, he's 10 years old. In the second film, he's in secondary school, he's 16. In the last film, he's going to be 21.
Oh, wow. So, there will be like a trilogy, right?
Yeah, I mean, that will be the final sort of concluding part of the trilogy. And I'm still writing it at the moment, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, we are looking forward to it too. So, you also portray the life of Auntie Terry in your film is so like real, because we watch her like calling back to her home and asking about like her son and anything like. And on the day off, she's making to work in a salon like that. Like how do you come up with this idea? I mean, like it's like the dilemma or like the life of a migrant workers face in Singapore. Like how do you like? Did you do the research or like you just like observe or just hear stories from Auntie Terry or how?
So basically, of course, there was a lot in my, of stories that I've heard in along the way, in my life. Because in Singapore, I would say that maybe, in a classroom, probably like half the class of students have got like a domestic worker working in their families or taking care of them. So
Mhm.
it's very, very prevalent. It's very common that you have sort of a live-in sort of
Yeah.
helper or maid working at your home. And I remember when I was writing the script, I reached out to sort of like organization, NGO that
Oh,
sort of does a lot of work with sort of like domestic workers, from from Indonesia, from Philippines, from Myanmar, from other parts that, and I did a lot of interviews as well, and you start to, you a lot of it you sort of know, but you start to really put a face to those
yeah.
stories, and at the same time it's quite interesting, like, I've realized like over the years that, I think all Asian economies or Asian countries, we are so driven by a kind of pragmatism,
Yep.
like it's completely driven by numbers and the economy. So it's quite ironic that you have got, like sort of mothers who give up their
Yeah.
children and give up sort of like taking care of their children so that they can work, and yet, um, and then in the same way, like with all these domestic helpers, they are sort of leaving their children behind, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, so that they can make, a better living, and they actually end up taking care of
Yeah.
other people's children, like
Yeah.
in Singapore, in sometimes in Hong Kong, even like as far as like Canada, Australia, and even like in the Middle East, in Dubai.
Yeah.
So, I find it really ironic, that
Yeah.
in every, and it's all driven by economics. Like I want to make more money so that I can earn a better sort
Living.
of living, so that I can provide for my children. But but sadly, it means I'm not taking care of my children, and I put that care, to someone else.
Yeah.
Um, and it's sort of a cycle, a vicious cycle that goes on and on and on and on.
And still going up until now.
Yeah, so I find it quite cruel, and in fact, I find the system quite brutal. If you think about, a lot of these, foreign sort of domestic workers that come to homes, like in Singapore or Hong Kong, and they work in your household, and they spend so many years. I remember, like, we had a Filipino helper for 8 years, but my cousins, they had a Indonesian helper for 20 years. So like for so many years, so they become part of your lives. They almost feel like another mother to you, or like a family member. But eventually, when it's time to go home, when the family decides that, oh, the children have grown up, or we don't need the helper anymore, or we have run out of money. And it's so brutal. They just, it's the adults that sort of cut off the lines, and they get sent home, and um, it's very cruel, and it's quite painful.
Yeah, true. And like here in Indonesia, there are a lot of left behind families, left behind son and daughters because their parents have to like go abroad to make a living. And like you said, there are a lot of people who hasn't coming back home to Indonesia because of they are working abroad. And when they are coming here, sometimes their children doesn't know like her or his father or mother because of it. So yeah, the irony and like the brutality of the economics, how the economic is going in our world is also reflected in your film. And and in Ilo Ilo, I realized that there. there almost no music at all, like throughout the film. Like, do you have like any specific reason why you want to do it that this way? Because sometimes I see a lot of movies, a lot of films that put a lot of like background music as in the scene and everything, but you really put it at the end. Like, why do you choose this way?
It's for Ilo Ilo. It was my first feature, and
Mhm.
it came as a surprise for me as well because I thought I was gonna have music in the film. In fact, I hired a film composer and I said, oh, when we have
Oh,
the,
okay.
start when we have like a second cut ready, I'll show it to you. And but when we were cutting the film and we put it together, my my editors and I, we have no idea where to put the music. Um, and then we were figuring out, yeah, where do you put the score? Like, what score does, because it was already very emotional. And so I sent it to the composer that I was looking to work with, and he's based in London. He's British, and he saw the film, and then we met up in a cafe, and he said, um, I never ever tell directors this, but I don't think your film needs any music because like everything is there and it's emotional, and I'm not sure if music will make it too sentimental, or it would just be actually spoiling the atmosphere that the film actually has already. Um, so it was quite close to my gut feeling when we were cutting the film, but I knew at the end, like there was going to be a song, and interestingly, that was for Ilo Ilo. But on my new film, Wet Season, there's no music as well. But it wasn't. I didn't decide that during editing. I decided that even when I was writing the script, because I knew, the film is called Wet Season, and 80% of the film takes place in the rain. So I decided that the rain is going to be the score and the music for the film. So apart from, just like Ilo Ilo, apart from moments where there's diegetic music maybe come out of the radio or something like that, there's no score at all apart from a song that comes at the end of the film. Um, I don't know whether there's gonna be music in my third film. I hope so, because otherwise I'm gonna be known for the director that doesn't use any music.
Music.
And um, yeah, but as much as I don't use a lot of score in my films, but um, but sound is still a huge part of my filmmaking, and I work really hard with my sound designers to get the tension and atmosphere and the nuances right in my work.
Yeah, because when I watched it, I was like, yeah, there's no music at all, but all of what we need to feel and to see is already there. You don't need something to add it up, and it's so funny because your music composer said the same thing,
Yeah.
and your second film, second long film, feature film, it's called Wet Season. I already saw the trailer. It is screened in Toronto, I think, and it also screened through a streaming service called Hook. I tried to look it up in Indonesia, but unfortunately, unfortunately, the Hook Indonesia is closed. So maybe I'm looking forward to see it. But as I know from the trailer and also the synopsis, Wet Season is talking a lot about a relationship between a student and a teacher, right? And maybe you can tell us more like why we have to watch this film, and it's something that I don't know the complete story, the complete story about the film, but when we are talking about the relationship between the teacher and a student, it's something like taboo in
Yeah.
Asian
Yeah.
background. Maybe you want to say something more about it.
I think the film, I've never sort of described the film ever as like, oh, it's a film about a teacher-student relationship.
Yeah.
I think the film is very much centered on a 40-year-old woman who is in crisis. She's having a midlife crisis, and she's reached a point where She's having problems in her marriage. She's having problems at work. She's having problems in her family and personal life, and it's about how she needs to, find herself again and start life over again. So for me, it's really sort of about a woman that needs to sort of find some form of self-salvation.
Uh,
So I've never sort of like put the emphasis on the teacher-student relationship, even though, of course, through the trailer and it's very easy for critics to write about the angle. And if you notice in Ilo Ilo, I like to sort of explore themes about what it means to be a mother, what it
yeah,
means to be family, like it's family, a relationship that is connected by blood ties,
yeah,
or or can two strangers be a family? And I think if you were to see Wet Season, one would uh, definitely see that continuation of that team and the exploring of that. In fact, in the very third film that I'm writing at the moment, I'm exploring that as well.
oh, yeah,
And why should people see it? Because I think a lot of people are going who have seen Ilo Ilo and enjoyed Ilo Ilo. I think first it's a very different film from Ilo Ilo, even though it's sort of a family drama as well. But I think you'll be very intrigued to see Kojala sort of grown up, like from, when we shot him in Ilo Ilo, he was 11, and now he's, when I shot him in Wet Season, he's 17. And you would see how different the actress Yo Yan Yan, looks in this film, completely different. And I would say it's probably a career best performance from Yo Yan Yan, and it's definitely worth watching. And I hope at some point Indonesian audiences will get a chance to see it.
yeah. I'm into that. And like I see also in the Ilo Ilo, you focus a lot on like a role of a family. Like you can see that the mom also has the responsibility at house, and also she has responsibility to taking care Jaile if Jaile was like the principal's calling, the teacher is calling. And also we can see that Auntie Terry also has double roles, like as a mother who is leaving behind her son, and also but as a maid that have to take care of Jaila. Like um, do this kind of roles of family that you mentioned before, that the theme is about like family, like do this kind of theme also like written in your third film, or it will be like
Yeah, I think it's the third film. It's a family drama, and it also explores um, family and the definition of these very complex human relationships.
yeah,
Can strangers become a family? I
yeah,
think I think that is something which is sort of a running theme in all these three films.
trilogy,
So
yeah.
definitely look forward to the last one. I think I'm writing the script right now, and I myself am very excited to get it into production. We won't be shooting it so soon because Kojala is serving is the army right now in
Oh yeah,
Singapore. All boys have to serve 2 years of national service in the military, and he's doing that now. And he finishes um,
2020.
January or February 2022.
Oh
So
yeah.
we're hoping that, fingers crossed, in 2022 we will go into production.
Yay! And also, can you share your stories as a like a migrant, because now you are living in the UK, and what like I remember in one of your interview, like you said, you don't have to be like living in Singapore to write about Singapore, right? Because like how your experience as a migrant in the UK, in London, influence your writing.
I think it's not so much about my experience as a migrant in London, but I think it's the experience of living um, outside of Singapore and living, like, or looking at Singapore from afar, that really informs my work. I feel, if I was still living in Singapore, um, perhaps the Ilo Ilo that you see might not be what it is right now. It might be a very stereotype sort of like, soap opera that we are so used to looking on television, especially in Asia. Soap operas are always set in a
Yeah.
family, um, and it could easily be that. But I think what's interesting is having that distance allows me to look at my country, my history, my family, look, Singapore society, with more objectivity.
Yeah.
Instead of
Because you put like this.
sort of like seeing it
Yeah.
that way, and then you being sort of trapped, like um, in the world itself. For the first time, like actually, um, I thought I saw so much more clarity that I
Mhm.
perhaps wouldn't be able to see. I think I'm glad that I still live outside of Singapore. I think it's the same sort of gaze and the same sort of eyes that I use to write Wet Season. And also now I'm writing my third film. I'm not living in Singapore, but these days, I still go back to Singapore quite a bit, maybe 2 months or in a year, sometimes even longer, much longer, maybe 5, 6 months if I'm shooting a film there. But because we are so connected, right, these days, you get to read the news on social media, you get to read the
Yeah.
news online through newspapers, that even though you're not back physically at home, but you really get a sense of what's going on.
Yeah.
But it helps me to, the distance actually helps me to gain a much clearer perspective.
Yeah. Okay. And there are some questions too from our Podstalgia friends. Maybe can you share your most or favorite influential film director? Like someone like you really love the works and everything?
Yeah, I mean, I've got it's very hard for me to sort of like choose one,
Yeah.
but I've a lot of filmmakers I admire. I love Yasujiro Ozu, the Japanese director. I love, I like Ang Lee a lot for the humanity in his work. I like Edward Young. I My most favorite filmmaker is probably Lee Chang-dong, the Korean sort of auteur, Korean master. And then I also like Hirokazu Koreeda, the Japanese director. I am a huge fan of Francois Truffaut, the French New Wave director. I have a very wide taste, but
Yeah, I
I
can see that.
guess the filmmakers that I connect most and the filmmakers that speak to me most are those who uh, are interested in the human condition, um, and you feel a sense uh, of truth and humanity in their work.
Yeah, like for Hirokazu Koreeda, like his works is talking a lot about like family complex relationship too. And have you? There's another question. Have you ever watched an Indonesian film before?
Yes, I've watched Indonesian films before, and actually,
What do you watch?
I have a friend who's an Indonesian director, Molly Sawyer.
Oh yeah, Molly. Sorry, yeah, yeah,
And I love Molly. I think she's incredibly talented. I've seen all her films. From her very
Oh
first feature all the way to Malina.
yeah,
And
nah.
I'm almost so jealous that she's so good, at diving in and out of different genres and styles, and you could see, for me, you can tell. Uh, by two things, whether you've got a good director, like whether you can direct great performances out of the actors, and also where the director is putting the camera. And it feels like in all her works, Molly seems to know what she's doing with the camera. And I think her filmmaking is very assured and very confident. Um, uh, and I'm incredibly jealous because I can't see myself making a film like Marlena. You know, like she's too cool. Like one thing is like she's so cool as a filmmaker. I wish I was more cool as a filmmaker. You know, but I feel like yeah, I'm a little bit too old school, and yeah, which is why I feel the new there's a lot of um, talent in the new generation of filmmakers, and yeah, Molly is someone that for every film that she makes, I would definitely watch.
Yeah, yeah. Like I remember when she released the Marlina and the Murderer in 4X, a lot of people coming to the cinema to watch it because I don't know in Singapore, but in Indonesia, not all people can afford to go to cinema to watch film in the cinema. But when the Marlina is coming out, a lot of people like, okay, you have to watch this in the cinema. You cannot like just download it from somewhere and just watch it on your laptop, but you have to go to cinema. And I also watched her another film. It's called What They Don't Talk About When They Talk
Yeah,
About Love.
the one about blind children.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is really,
I find that really moving, and it's quite wonderful. Like the tone of that
yeah,
film,
yeah,
which is why she's so good at sort of like going in and out of different genres and tones. And yeah, I think she's just incredibly talented.
and in Singapore itself, like how do you see the culture of going to the cinema and watching film? Is it as like do a lot of people going to the cinema to watch, or they just like choose to okay, I just like wait it on like a streaming service or something, or
I would say I would say in Singapore, you know, like Singapore has, if I'm not wrong, one of the most number of screens, cinema screens per capita in the world. For a small country, we have actually a lot of cinema screens, you know, for the population that we have. And I think cinemas, and I think Singaporeans still go to the cinema a lot. But, you know, like, I think in a lot of places, especially like the rest of Asia, you know, the films that, you know, audiences in Singapore, you know, usually go to are huge blockbusters,
okay,
and which is quite sad. You know, it's very hard to try and get um, Singapore audiences to, you know, take a chance on other types of films, and I find it incredibly challenging, especially for Singapore filmmakers. You know, I think, you know, apart from myself, there's a whole group of very talented young filmmakers, you know, in my generation, and they're making a lot of wonderful work. You know, that are winning prizes, being screened, you know, across the world, but uh, they are not seen enough in Singapore, and I don't know how one could change that. It's just, and it's getting harder and harder. You know, I
oh,
think with the rise of streaming platforms, you know, the Netflix and all that, um, it's getting harder and harder to try and get people out of their homes to watch a film unless it's Avengers, you know, unless it's a Marvel, you know, blockbuster, or it's like a Disney sort of like Frozen 2 or something like that. Um, so I do hope that audiences, not just in Singapore but across Asia, would come out and actually support their own filmmakers more. I think it's very important because if audiences, especially local audiences, you know, regional audiences, do not support our work, it's impossible for, you know, our films to be sustainable, because unfortunately even a low budget film or independent film, it is very costly. Filmmaking is very costly because there's equipment, there's post-production, there is a lot of people involved, you know, easily 20, 30, 40, 50, sometimes even 100 people involved in a film. um, so um, it's not cheap to make a film.
yeah,
You know, however, we want to make it as cheap as possible, but it's very hard, um, because it is, you know, a very expensive medium, and I think the only way is if sort of audiences actually, um, you know, support their own, and appreciate, you know, or even take a chance or take a risk on um, uh, certain kind of films that one has never seen before or isn't used to.
Yeah, true. And what about like independent screenings or alternative,
There
screen
are alternative, there are alternative venues. There is the
with projector?
projector,
Yeah,
which is sort of like probably the only art house cinema sort of screening venue in Singapore. It's really tough on them as well because there's a lot of overheads, rental and maintenance and
yeah,
stuff. And I think it's very important, and it's quite a niche crowd that they have, but it's good that they have a strong following. And then of course, there is a newly open theater at that is being run by the Asian Film Archive called the Oldham Theater, and they do certain art house releases, and they screen a lot of like restored films and old archival films as well. So I really really hope that people just don't think of cinema as blockbusters
yeah,
in a cineplex and a multiplex. I hope more and more Singapore audiences come out to support these alternative venues.
yeah, true. Because I think that kind of things also happening in Indonesia too. Because lot not all people here are like have access to the cinema, right? Because our number of screening is not really high, with all of the like large population and wide regions. But fortunately, there is some like movement around here in Indonesia that like a lot of independent filmmakers and also like alternative screenings are hand in hand together to like screen more films. Maybe they're not going to the big cinema like here, but sometimes like they conduct like small screenings and rent some, sometimes a co-working space or something and screen a film and invite the filmmakers and all. Yeah, I think it's Singapore and it's Indonesia that we have similar condition that we face right now regarding the film industry. Okay, that's all for from me. All of the
Great.
questions already answered, and maybe you wanna add something that you wanna say to your fellow young filmmakers, because there are a lot of, I believe there are a lot of young aspiring filmmakers in Asia right now, and they, I don't know, what do you want to say to them?
I would say it's it's really tough work. I think if you want to be a filmmaker, it's very important that you're in it for the right reasons. It's because you love film. It's because you love cinema, and perhaps you're willing to die for cinema. Because don't be a filmmaker if you're what if you're in love with the idea of being a director.
Yeah,
Because you'd soon realize that there's actually behind the red carpet, behind the lights, camera, and all of that, behind all that limelight, it's actually a lot of struggles and a lot of hardship, a lot of sweat and tears, and blood, sweat, and tears, I would say. But if you're really passionate about it, um, if you're dying to tell stories using that visual medium, um, do it and keep trying, um, and don't give up. And the other thing I would say is, I think it's very easy to be so obsessed with the idea. I realize when sometimes I teach from time to time, at a film school here in the UK and sometimes in Asia as well. And I realize it's so easy to be obsessed with the idea of wanting to be the filmmaker, wanting to be the director. But I would say, it takes a certain personality to be a producer, a certain personality to be a director. And you know, even if you realize or you discover that maybe I don't have that talent in that department, or it's not something that's suited to my personality, you can still continue working in film in different ways.
Yep.
You could be, I would say we are lacking in a lot of very good sort of like people in art direction, in the art department, production design, in sound design, in makeup, in costumes, in wardrobe, and there are a lot of ways where you could actually contribute to make a good film. And
Yeah.
on the other side, you perhaps you could be working on marketing for a film. You could be, writing about films. You could be a film critic. I just think it's important that apart from people, there needs to be groups of people that are making films, but there needs to be groups of people like yourself as well. Writing and talking about them and actually connecting the work with audiences, because otherwise it's very hard when audiences go in and, oh yeah, but this film is so slow, or this film has no music, oh this film has subtitles, and they struggle with it. But it takes sort of like writers and bloggers and people that want to talk about cinema, and people that can actually uh, explain to audiences, how to read a film, how to understand a film, how to understand the subtext in a film, and I think that's very, very important too.
Yeah, yeah, like we all love cinema and we can like contribute to it in many forms that we can, right? Not all
Yeah.
people becoming a director, but we also need like audience, we also need the editor, and also the the art department, and also we also need the marketing. And yeah, like you said, I think it's what what is so great about cinema. It involves a lot of people, and it also like put all of us together, like loving something that struck a chord in all of our hearts. Okay, thank you so much, Anthony. That's all from me, and I hope Indonesian people can watch web season as soon as possible. And I remember that you also make a short film called Case, right?
Yeah, I've made a lot of short films. I think I've made at
Yeah,
least 10 short films.
that's your films. Like, maybe can you share like because I have been like looking and searching some of all your short films. I only find like in Fitzy, one of your short film about like calling back home.
Yeah.
That one. But how do you know, like, do you post it or share it somewhere like Case and Ahma and
Um,
other?
I think if I'm not wrong, Amar is on YouTube, I think.
Ahma, okay.
Yeah, but Haze is not available anywhere yet. Um, yeah, some of my short films they're widely screened. They've in the past at festivals, but they're not available online. So, but but if people are interested, there is sort of like a company
Mm-hmm.
which is called
Like,
Objectives
oh,
in
okay.
Singapore, and they work with a lot of filmmakers on their short films. And
Mhm.
I think they're finding ways to actually exhibit and show these films more to audiences everywhere, including those outside of Singapore.
Okay, because when I see the premise of Haze, it's so interesting because
Yeah,
because it's related to like what happened here in Indonesia with all of the fog, the haze,
yeah,
and fire, forest, and everything. So I hope I and my friends maybe in the future can contact Objective and try to exhibit uh, some of your films as well
yeah.
here screening. Have you come ever to Indonesia like for attending a screening or something?
You know what? I was in Indonesia a few months ago for an event that Hook did,
Okay.
uh, and it's the first time I've been back in Indonesia for, I think, 25 or 30 years.
Whoa. Yeah. So,
Yeah, because I think the last time I was in Indonesia before, like last year, I went once just for one day. Just for one day. I went to Jakarta for one day. But the last time I was in Indonesia, actually, I've been to Indonesia a lot because Singaporeans, we go to Batam
Oh yeah,
and Tanjung Pinang for
yeah.
holidays a lot. So, and I've been to Bali, but Jakarta, the first time I've been to Jakarta, I was 10 years old, and the second time I've been is literally like 20 years later last year.
Wow. Maybe.
Yeah, 25 years later. Oh my God. Yeah, yeah. And Jakarta has changed so much. In fact, I'm actually looking forward to going to Jakarta more because I even from my short, stay, just one day in Jakarta, I feel a certain vibe. I feel a certain energy, and that energy is quite exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe you will like the chaotic energy here in Jakarta.
yeah, maybe I think so. It's
But
it's it's wildly different from Singapore.
yeah, yeah, very different. And yeah, Batam, Tanjung Pinang. I already like went to Batam and Tanjung Pinang only like once in my life, like last year. But to Singapore, I went quite a lot, maybe like 2 times a year, like for meeting my friends and my family there. So yeah, and thank you so much for your time. I will stop recording right now.
Okay.